I held the photograph for 20 minutes before my hands stopped shaking. It was taken in 1967, outside the house on Maple Street in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My father, my mother, my brother Daniel, and me. We were all smiling, squinting into the September sun. My mother wore her blue Sunday dress, the one she saved for special occasions. My father had his arm around Daniel's shoulders, pride written all over his face. I stood off to the side, 16 years old, trying to look older than I was, my hair pulled back in a ponytail. That was 2 weeks before Daniel left for Vietnam. You're listening to a quiet story from a parent never forgets, stories about memory, family, time, and the moments life never truly lets go. The photograph sat in a shoebox in my closet for decades, buried under old letters and birthday cards I couldn't throw away. I couldn't look at it for years. Couldn't bear to see Daniel's face so young, so full of whatever he thought waited for him over there. He'd enlisted the day after his 18th birthday, against our parents' wishes, against everything my mother had begged him to reconsider. But Daniel had always been stubborn, even as a boy. He believed in duty, in service, in doing what he thought was right even when the rest of us couldn't understand it. He came home in the spring of 1969. Different. Quieter. The Daniel who left had been full of energy, always laughing, always moving. The Daniel who came back moved slowly, carefully, like he was navigating a world made of glass. His eyes looked past us at dinner, past the walls, past everything familiar. He'd sit at the kitchen table while my mother talked about the neighbors, about Mrs. Henderson's new grandchild, about the church social coming up, and he'd nod without hearing a word. My father would try to draw him out, talking about the Hawkeyes, about fixing up the old truck together, about maybe going fishing up at the lake like they used to every summer. But Daniel was somewhere else. Somewhere none of us could reach. I remember one night in particular. It was late March, just after his 21st birthday. We'd had cake, my mother's chocolate cake with the cream cheese frosting Daniel had always loved as a boy. He'd eaten one small piece and thanked her politely, formally, like she was a stranger doing him a kindness he didn't deserve. After dinner, I found him sitting on the back porch in the dark, smoking a cigarette. He'd never smoked before the war. "Danny," I said softly, using the name I'd called him since we were children playing in the backyard. He didn't turn around. "You should go inside, Beth. It's cold out here." "I don't mind the cold." I sat down beside him on the wooden steps, the same steps where we'd sat countless times growing up. "Talk to me." "Nothing to talk about. You've been home almost a year. You barely say 10 words a day. Mama's worried sick. Daddy doesn't know what to do." He took a long drag on his cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the darkness. "I'm fine. You're not fine. None of us are fine. But we could be, if you'd just..." "Just what?" He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that frightened me deep in my chest. Something hollow and hurt and far away. "Just pretend it didn't happen? Just go back to being who I was before?" "I can't, Beth. That person doesn't exist anymore." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to tell him he was still my brother, still the boy who taught me to ride a bike when I was 5, who defended me from bullies at school, who'd walked me home from my first dance when my date had stood me up. But the words caught in my throat, because I could see it was true. The Daniel who'd left wasn't the Daniel who'd come back. One morning in April 1970, his bed was empty. No note. No goodbye. No explanation of where he'd gone or why. Just gone, like he'd been erased from our lives overnight. My mother found his military jacket folded neatly on the chair, his dog tags sitting on top of the worn fabric. Everything else, his clothes, his few possessions, the battered duffel bag he'd brought home from the war, gone with him. My parents called the police immediately, filed a missing persons report. But Daniel was 22 years old, and he'd left of his own accord. There wasn't much the police could do. My father drove to every town within 100 miles, showing Daniel's photograph to gas station attendants and diner waitresses and motel clerks. Anyone who might have seen him. My mother called every hospital, every veteran center, every shelter, every place she could think of where Daniel might have gone for help. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Every time the phone rang, my mother would jump, hoping it was news. Every time a letter arrived, my father would examine the postmark carefully, looking for clues. Every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, they waited. The table was set for even though only 3 of us sat down to eat. I got married in 1972 to a good man named Robert. Had my first child in 1974, a daughter we named Sarah. My parents became grandparents, but there was always an absence at every celebration, an empty chair at every table, a shadow over every moment of joy. We talked about Daniel less as time went on, not because we'd forgotten him, but because it hurt too much to wonder where he was, whether he was safe, whether he was even alive. My mother never stopped looking. Even in her 70s, even when her health began to fail, she'd skin crowds at the grocery store, at church, anywhere she went. She'd clip newspaper articles about veterans reuniting with their families, about men who'd disappeared and then come home after years away. She kept Daniel's room exactly as he'd left it, his bed made with military precision, his books on the shelf, his baseball glove sitting on the dresser collecting dust. She died in 1998, 2 months after her 80th birthday. Heart failure, the doctors said, but I knew better. I think her heart had been failing slowly for 28 years, wearing itself out with hope and grief and the endless, exhausting work of waiting for someone who never came home. My father followed her 2 years later. Stroke. He'd been sitting in his chair in the living room, looking at that same photograph from 1967, the one of all 4 of us together and whole. The paramedics found it on the floor beside him, still clutched in his hand. I inherited the house on Maple Street. Sorted through decades of accumulated memories, photo albums, letters, Daniel's unopened birthday cards my mother had written every single year and never sent because she had no address. I found journals where she'd written to him, telling him about her days, about the grandchildren he'd never met, about how much she missed him. Hundreds of pages of one-sided conversations with a ghost. I moved to Des Moines in 2003, closer to my daughter and her family. Tried to build a life that didn't revolve around absence. Tried to let Daniel go the way my parents never could. Last week, a letter arrived. The envelope was postmarked Portland, Oregon. The return address was unfamiliar, just a street name and number I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail or some kind of advertisement. But something made me open it. Some instinct I couldn't name. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in script I hadn't seen in 54 years, but recognized immediately. My hands started shaking before I even read the first line. Dear Beth, it began. I don't know if you still live at this address. I don't know if you'll even want to hear from me after all this time. But I need to try. I need you to know I'm sorry. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd become. Afraid of the anger I felt all the time. The dreams that wouldn't stop. The way I'd wake up convinced I was back there. I was afraid I'd hurt someone. Afraid I'd hurt Mama or Daddy or you. I went to Oregon because I could disappear there. Worked construction, lived alone, kept to myself. Saw a doctor eventually, got help for what they now call PTSD. It took years, but I got better. Well enough to live, anyway. I wanted to come home so many times. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became. How do you apologize for 30 years? I found out about Mama and Daddy 3 years ago. Stood at their graves and tried to find words. There weren't any. I'm 74 now. You're 76. We're running out of time. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know I never stopped being your brother. If you're willing to see me, I'll be at Mama and Daddy's graves October 12th, around noon. If you come, I'll be there. If you don't, I'll understand. Your brother, Daniel. I read the letter 4 times, then sat down on my couch and cried for an hour straight. Cried for my parents who died waiting. Cried for Daniel, carrying his guilt for half a century. Cried for all the lost years. My daughter found me there. Mom, what's wrong? I handed her the letter, silently. Watched her face as she read it. Are you going to go? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. Of course I'm going. October 12th was a bright, cool day. I drove to Cedar Rapids early. my heart pounding the entire way. I got to the cemetery at 11:30. Walked slowly through the rows of headstones until I found my parents' graves, side by side under an oak tree. And there, standing with his head bowed, was a man with white hair and stooped shoulders. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt. His hands were weathered and scarred. He looked up as I approached. His eyes, still Daniel's eyes, still that same blue, filled with tears. "Beth," he said, and his voice broke on my name. I stopped a few feet away, studying his face, trying to find my brother in this old man. And then I saw it, the slight crooked smile, the way he tilted his head. "Still Daniel. Always Daniel." "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came. You're my brother." We stood there for a long moment, 54 years between us. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry." And I stepped forward and put my arms around him, felt him collapse against me, felt his shoulders shake. We stood there by our parents' graves and held each other while the past and present collided and somehow began to heal. Some absences last a lifetime, but some stories aren't over yet. This is a fictional story created for emotional storytelling purposes.